Let's work on an intuitive watercolor in real time rather than trying to speed it up into a 60-second short. It's actually kind of wild to see how slow things actually go. So here you see I'm making my initial mark, and for this intuitive painting, that initial mark becomes the foundation of the entire painting. And it can become really nerve-wracking in the beginning because if you don't like your initial line, you can kind of feel defeated right off the bat. So you have to let go of liking your initial mark and just work with it and see what it is trying to tell you. Intuitive painting really challenges the inner perfectionist and really requires you to step outside of your comfort zone and experiment and explore and really let go of the outcome. If you're trying to visualize an outcome early on in intuitive painting, it will really mess up the intuitive aspect of what you're trying to do. Because the minute you start planning and building expectations about where you want things to go, you invite in disappointment and you invite in hesitation. And I definitely have some moments of hesitation here where I try to think about where I want to go next and really take in the composition that's forming in front of me, but I do my absolute best to not engage with the inner critic. I notice when the inner critic becomes louder. I notice when the inner critic tries to convince me that what I'm doing isn't good enough, but I don't engage with it. The moment that I begin to engage with the inner critic is the moment that I start to give up on myself and my intuition. And I would say that's probably 90% of how my art went when I really started to teach myself how to paint, especially with watercolor. I would get really caught up in the perfection of it all, and I had barely any skills to even go into watercolor with in the beginning, but I was sitting there expecting myself to just create works that looked like the works I was seeing online. And I was convinced that the reason it wasn't coming out exactly like how I was seeing other artists do it, even though it was my first time, must have been because I wasn't good enough to be an artist and I should just quit. And if you go way far back into my art journey on Instagram, you'll see that I really did start with watercolor, which is such a tricky medium. And when I found alcohol ink and realized I could make a mess, I could challenge the perfectionist, I could loosen up, I dove into the alcohol ink and the fluid painting because it helped me build the intuitive confidence I needed to come back many years later to watercolor and feel confident enough to create works of art like this without any plan and without any, forethought. So if you're just getting started in your journey to painting intuitively, just know that if you come in with a rusty intuition, it's going to take some time to clean off that rust. You might have a good intuition about other things in your life, but when it comes to art, that really, really requires you to get quiet and tap in and let all of the noise inside of your head just kind of fade out. And it's not going to happen the first time. Learning how to set yourself up for success so that your intuition is invited to the show is part of the process. For me, it was realizing that if I tried to force painting when I felt overstimulated, or if I felt like I had to be painting or I should be painting, it would automatically create a resistance within me to paint. And my intuition would get afraid because intuition hides from perfectionism, because perfectionism squashes intuition. And so coming into a fresh piece of paper or canvas with no goal in mind can be scary because what if I hate it? What if it's not good? What if I waste my materials? So the first thing you have to do is go into it knowing that you're not there to create something you love. That if you waste your materials, fine, you can always paint over it or use it for collaging or mixed media. You have to go into it knowing that what you create does not matter. That what matters is the process. And I know how cheesy and corny this can sound, but until you really figure it out, it's going to sound that way. It's going to sound silly. But then that moment happens where you finally sit down and it clicks and you're like, oh my goodness, I just painted for a whole hour and created something that I feel, whatever about, but I enjoyed the process the whole time. To enjoy the process and not care about the end result is freedom for artists. And I promise you will create end results that you love. Letting go will allow you to access the most pure and vulnerable parts of yourself creatively. The parts of yourself that were told they couldn't be an artist or art was for a hobby. Those parts are what rule the perfectionist. And so if you're creating from that place, it is going to be almost impossible to create something you truly love. And it's going to become nearly impossible to love creating because you're going to be constantly under the thumb of the perfectionist. So get to know your perfectionist. Get to know its wants, its needs. What would happen if your perfectionist stopped trying to protect you from making bad art? What would happen if it took on a new role? What would happen if you decided that the perfectionist's job was not to gatekeep your ability to create? Because you, my friend, have the power. It is not your perfectionist that runs the show. It is not your fear that runs the show. It is not your not enoughness that runs the show. You run the show. And so through this art, let's deconstruct that perfectionist. Let's deconstruct that part of you that thinks you're not enough. Build a healthier relationship with it. Tell it, you see it, you hear it, you understand that it is so afraid of you failing that it is trying to prevent you from painting in the first place. Let it know it serves a purpose and you understand that that perfectionist is there to try to keep you safe. But that perfectionist needs to know you do not need it anymore. Not in the way you used to. You need it now to be an ally, to support you, to help you become more of yourself, more of the artist you are meant to be so that you can create beautiful works of art and not feel like you're never enough. Please remember to like and subscribe if you found this intuitive painting pep talk helpful. Thanks so much. I'll see you soon.